Our next session is called, What If It Is Criminal? What if it's criminal abuse? I know someone was just asking me outside, like, what do you do if you become aware of something that is potentially criminal, that is endangering someone? What do you do about it? And that's what we're going to discuss next. All right. So if it is criminal abuse, the first thing we do is to prepare. Here's the thing, if you're working in churches, organizations, schools, there will come a time when you interact with something that has the potential or the reality of criminal elements. It's a really bad idea to wait until that happens to figure out how to handle it. So what we do is prepare first. Number one, we create and enforce policies. We're going to talk more about policies and what those look like in a later session today, but right now, create and enforce policies. Educate adults, educate children, make this a topic that is common knowledge, common understanding, and a comfortable, open, transparent topic of discussion. Bring it out of the darkness and into the light. Number two, watch and listen. And when something comes to your awareness, you talk very carefully, if at all. Do not go and discuss it with everyone and talk to besties and activate the prayer chain and discuss it with the church board and go to the elders or go to the, no. You can endanger people unknowingly by talking too much when something comes to your attention. Everything you know, document it. Document everything. You're not a professional investigator. Don't try to be. You're not judge, jury, lawyer, law enforcement. Don't try to be. But everything that comes across your way, write it down. When did you come aware of it? Who told you? What time was it? Was it on the phone? Was it in person? Where were you told this? What do you know about it? Keep track. Details matter. And if you eventually need to tell someone who is a professional investigator, who is law enforcement, who is a judge, an attorney, or jury, you will have documented track instead of your memory of what you have learned. Collect any evidence that comes your way. Don't throw away stuff. Let's just say you work in a high school environment and someone comes to you with underage sexting. Do not participate or help the other person delete all the evidence simply because they're embarrassed about it or they're worried someone else will find out. You keep evidence. Here's the caveat on that. If it is something that is indecent and it is of a minor, you do not want to keep it on your device because then you are now guilty of having child porn. So you don't help someone delete it, you take it to law enforcement, and you do that immediately. You do not say, well, I'll just keep those pictures over on my phone, send those to me. No! Don't do that. And also, don't help erase it. Do not confront or alert possible perpetrators. Our instinctive Christian thing is often to say, wow, I can't believe they're accusing so-and-so of such and such. I'm going to go talk to them and see if I can get the other side of the story. Don't. Not because those facts don't need to be gotten. They do. But you are not the right person to be obtaining those facts. Do not wait to report if the victim is under 18. Every state has different mandatory reporter laws. Know the laws in your state. Some states are every adult is a mandatory reporter. Other states have specific professions that are mandatory reporters. But it is a good policy that if you are over 18 and working in any volunteer or professional capacity that places you in charge of minors in some way, you might very possibly be a mandatory reporter. If you don't tell law enforcement, if you don't make a report, you can be held liable for that. Watch for signs of sexual abuse, especially if you're working with children. These can be sleep problems, sexual acting out alone or with other children, a child knowing or imitating something that does not seem like age-appropriate sexual knowledge for a child of that age, drawing sexual pictures, unexplained or new hyperactivity, being afraid of being alone with certain adults, unusual or exaggerated non-age-appropriate interest in bodies. It can also include wearing excessive clothing. Sometimes girls who have been sexually assaulted try to compensate for their feelings of shame and being used by wearing big, baggy, lots of clothing, trying to hide under the clothing. The flip side can also be true, dressing or acting suggestively. Stomach pain or digestive problems coming from anxiety and trauma. Difficulty walking or sitting, especially if there is a current active situation taking place. Torn, stained, or bloody underwear. Blood in the urine or the stool, and unexplained genital injuries. I know a personal friend of mine works in sex trafficking and crimes, the crimes unit in my county, in the sheriff's department. And one of the things that he has told me is a story of a teacher in a second grade classroom who had noticed some things being a little bit off with one particular student, but hadn't really paid attention to the pattern. And then one day, that teacher noticed from their position at the front of the classroom that the little girl didn't have underwear under her dress. And so the teacher went to the little girl and just asked why she didn't have panties on. And she said, because it hurts too much. And that began an investigation, and the child was being brutally assaulted on a regular basis in their home because a teacher was willing to ask a gentle question and to notice that something seemed off. Now, there are those who are just absolutely certain that we should never, ever involve outside civil authorities or secular authorities, and we should handle everything inside the church. But you know what? Back in the time of Moses with Israel in the Old Testament, the church, the body of Israel, under the theocracy where God was the ruler before there were kings, civil and criminal injustices were handled in very sharply definitive ways by the religious body. It was all taken care of all in one entity. We don't do that these days. We don't live under a theocracy. We don't have God telling the priests exactly what to do in all criminal cases. We have private life, religious life, and civil secular life. And that had changed also by the time of Christ. Romans 13, 1-3 says, "Let every soul be subject to the governing authorities. For there is no authority except from God, and the authorities that exist are appointed by God. Therefore, whoever resists authority resists the ordinance of God, and those who resist will bring judgment upon themselves." Short version, report to professional authorities. For rulers are not a terror to good works, they're a terror to evil. Do you want to be unafraid of the authority? Do what is good, and you will have praise from the same. There are 3 types of violations: criminal, civil, and moral. This is an extremely important thing to know when we're interacting with this. This is actually what was, Rhonda was just asking me a little bit earlier. What do we do when we have civil or criminal, and how do we understand the nuances of these? Criminal, we're going to address this first. Criminal issues are actions that fall under criminal statutes in your state. Now, just because something is wrong doesn't mean it's necessarily illegal or a crime. There are still a number of states where marital rape is entirely legal. Just recently, I can't remember which state it was, but it made the news that for the first time, raping someone who was unconscious became illegal. Now, is raping someone who is unconscious wrong? Well, yeah. But prior to the last year or two, in this one particular state, it was not a crime. It was only a crime if you were awake and said no. If you were unconscious, it was not a crime. So, it's important, if you're working in advocacy, if you're working in the abuse area, to know what is actually illegal and what is wrong but not illegal in your state. Criminal things can be proven with tangible facts and evidence. Sometimes cases get serious enough for a district attorney to take them on and prosecute them. Sometimes they are not considered serious enough for a district attorney to take them on and prosecute them. That doesn't mean they're not wrong. It just means they're not going to get prosecuted given the system as it is. Criminal conviction requires evidence beyond reasonable doubt. Think 85, 90, 95% reasonable, beyond a doubt, with physical evidence, tangible evidence. I'm not here to imply that the criminal system should change that, because we have to have a high evidentiary standard in order to be okay with taking someone out of society. Otherwise, anyone could be set up for anything, which still happens, as we all know. There's still corruption in the court system, but we have a high evidentiary standard for a very good reason. Even though some things may not be criminal convictions, they should still be disciplined within the church, because the church does not operate on criminal evidentiary standards, and we're going to get to that more. Civil things are things that fall under civil laws. They're not criminal, but they're still illegal. They can be proven with testimony and evidence. They have a lower evidentiary standard than criminal. It's just more likely than not. That means, imagine in your mind, 50% plus a feather likelihood that this person did this. That's what you need for a civil conviction. These should also be disciplined within the church, because you know why? The church operates on a standard of moral integrity. And God's standard is the highest standard of all. Moral failures based on biblical integrity may not rise to the level of criminal or civil statutes for prosecution, because moral standards cover all sorts of variances and depravity that may not be illegal. Is pornography illegal? Nope. Is it immoral? Absolutely. Is it wrong in the eyes of God to exploit people sexually for voyeurism? Absolutely. But it's not illegal. The criminal justice system is concerned with what is illegal, not what is right and wrong, not what is moral. And these should still be disciplined. Moral issues should still be disciplined within the church. You need to know things based on your state, criminal versus non-criminal. These are things that are determined by the state where the crime occurred. What are the technical definitions of rape in your state? What are the technical definitions of sexual assault versus sexual harassment? And most of the time, any sexual contact with a minor is considered criminal. But here's the thing. In some states, the age of consent is 16, not 18. You need to know what that is for your state. In some states, sexual contact with a 17-year-old is absolutely legal. It's not in other states. So 18 is not the default for everyone everywhere. These are things you need to know. Statutes of limitations. RAINN.org, RAINN.org, has a state guide for statutes of limitations. It's a great website with a ton of information. Statutes of limitations vary by state, most ranging from between 10 to 21 years for the most serious felony sex crimes. To get a comprehensive picture, go to RAINN.org, and you can determine by the state in which the crime occurred. There are also two different sets of statutes of limitations. One is the statute of limitations for criminal conviction. The other is statutes of limitations for civil suits. These are just things that you need to know if you're going to work in this area. You also, I already kind of covered this, things to know, mandated reporting. Certain individuals are mandated to report any kind of abuse or neglect of a child. In almost all states, professionals are required by law to report the suspicion of child abuse. In many states, all citizens are required to report. So someone asked me earlier, what do you do if you are working in an environment with children and you strongly suspect that someone is being molested or abused? And the answer is, you report it. And you allow the professionals to investigate. You provide support, and you have to realize that in reporting it, you are going to have repercussions. There will be unpleasant responses if your gut was off, and there will be unpleasant responses if it was actually going on and it's uncovered. It's not going to be fun, it's not going to be easy, it's not going to be clear-cut, it's going to be messy, it's going to be painful, and you need to do the right thing anyway. Romans 13:1 again, let every soul be subject to the governing authorities. So back to our original list. Number 1 was to create and enforce policies by preparing. Number 2 is to explore, watch, listen, talk very carefully, if at all. And number 3 now here is to report promptly. Don't warn the perpetrator or suspected perpetrator. Don't warn anyone who might go and warn the alleged perpetrator, and make sure the victim is safe. Report fully. So report promptly. Number 4, report fully. Report everything you know. Don't hold back thinking you know better than they do, which parts might be relevant. After the authorities know, encourage others who might have information to also report and to cooperate. If you are a church leader, this is the time in which you inform the church. Do not imply the guilt or the innocence of someone who has been alleged as a perpetrator. Simply ask the church members to cooperate with anything they know. If you are a church leader, notify any higher administration in this denomination, that would be the conference administrators, and ask them to help with a media statement should it be needed. Also, create and maintain safe ways for children, victims, and others to report. Make sure there are ways, confidentially, people to talk to, a hotline to call, and those are communicated to other people who might have information and might be too scared to come publicly forward with it. Number 5, this is part of your preparing, and that is to build your network. Protect the church regardless of civil decisions or criminal decisions. Law enforcement, this is really important. Law enforcement may not prosecute based on technicalities. I mean, hey, if some kind of evidence chain got messed up, that doesn't mean the person isn't guilty, and that doesn't mean that they're safe. The church must still take action inside the church body to keep others safe, even if a prosecution does not always end all the way through to a court case and conviction. And expect for victims and the church to need help, coaching, counseling, and support, because this is traumatic if you have this going on in your church family. Next slide. Connect with a situational consultant. This is something I do. I know other people who do this. If you have something blowing up in your church and you need outside perspective, let me know. If I can't help, I know people who specialize in strategic consulting for specific situations to help you walk through it and minimize risk to your church while maximizing protection for the vulnerable around you. Organize trainings to help your members learn how to handle abuse at the congregational level. Speak openly and publicly about it before it happens. Organize a committee to handle allegations at your regional administrator level, your conference, your union, whatever it is in your denomination, and ask your administrators to help implement this process. If your church doesn't do that already, ask them to. Make your desire for that to happen known. We're going to talk later about protocols in the Seventh-day Adventist denomination that, because this is the Seventh-day Adventist church here that is hosting this, we're going to talk about that, and we're going to outline that later as well. Number 6, refer. So we have prepare, be aware, and document. Report promptly, report fully, refer to professional counselors. Anyone who has been a victim or is a survivor should be referred to professional counselors, and if it happened in the church, around the church, during church, offer to pay for it. Cover their costs. Make sure they have no obstacles between them and healthy counseling. Remember that victims will tell counselors things that they don't feel safe to tell elsewhere, other places. I'm just like, otherwhere, just like put all those words in together. Refer the perpetrator to a professional counselor as well. If you're in a church leadership position, make sure that the perpetrator is not just going off without therapy. The perpetrator's counselor should have access to a victim's testimony so that they have balancing perspective and not just the perpetrator's side of the story. The church at large may also need help in processing. My colleague Jennifer Schwerzer developed this called the 4 R's. Ready the church for the possibility of abuse. Record the facts objectively, collecting any evidence. Report the incident or incidents to civil and church authorities. Civil first, then church. Refer the victim and the perpetrator to get professional help. So what about church security protocols? Well, does your church have a plan in case of emergencies about what to do in a worst-case scenario? Does your church conduct regular active shooter trainings with your security team and your church leadership? Does your church have emergency contact numbers easily accessible at all times? Do your church leaders, children's study class leaders, deacons, elders, greeters, all of them, do they know what to do based on any potential situation? Now, these are also in the poster you were given last night. So I'm going to just go through those 13, but this is based off of the 13 minimum security steps. You could always take it further, but these are the 13 minimum security steps. Number 1, prioritize and implement safety and security protocols for members and visitors. You cannot be held accountable if you don't have a policy in place. Now, policies are only as good as the people who put them in place and keep to them. But if you have no policy, then anyone can come around and just say, well, you were just discriminating against me personally. And you don't want that to happen. You want to have a policy in place so that you can default to the policy. And if the policy needs adjusting based on an individual situation, then you can do that. Number 2, immediately authorize and create an emergency response committee. This emergency response committee's job is to do 2 things. 1, identify trained emergency professionals among the membership to help assist with developing protocols. Don't do that blind. Who's in law enforcement in your church? Who's retired military in your church? Who's a security consultant in your church? Start there. If there is absolutely no one in your church that fills any of those kind of things, then go to your local network in the community and ask for help. But start by identifying people who have the skills and the qualifications to help in your congregation. And then have them help prep protocols for any variety of emergencies in the church and actively train leaders. Don't just do it in name, do it in action. That emergency response committee conducts an on-site risk assessment of the church and the property, the perimeter around it, to identify potential risks and where you are exposed. Do you leave back doors open to that field back there, and then everybody else is running around, and you might have 10-year-olds slip outside, and then there could be some unsavory person out in the back, and you would never know. There's no security cameras back there. There's no doors locked back there. There's no anyone wandering or patrolling. Those are exposure points. Those are risk points. Prioritize investment in safety technology, things like alarm systems, security cameras, key cards, things that track who's been where, what, and when, and who's doing what in your church and on your church property. Here's a basic one with the key cards. If you have physical keys instead of a computerized key card system, make sure you get those back. If you have to get someone off of your security team, or you have to if someone's no longer allowed access to the church, get them back and change the locks. It's real basic. Take steps to keep church secure. Prioritize investment in safety. I just read that one. Moving on. Number 5, liaise with community emergency response departments to establish working relationships. This is your fire station, your sheriff's department, your police station, domestic violence shelters, the mayor, the city council. Be on good terms with these people. Have lunch with them. Encourage your pastoral staff or your other church leaders, your ministry leaders. Be on first name basis with these people in your community. Number 6, investigate every accident or incident occurring on church property and prepare written reports for each occurrence and keep these filed in a secure location. Someone came up and asked me, he's like, I'm the director of security for my church, and I have noticed a number of older men who are in important positions in the church lingering and giving long hugs to some of the young ladies, and I've kind of tried to say things about it, but it just seems to fall on deaf ears. I know that there have been a couple of incidents in the past in our church, and I just don't know what to do about it. And my first question was, are you writing down every time you see it happen? Who was it? Who did it? Where were they standing? Just keep track. Start by just keeping track of the things that you see that are inappropriate behaviors. None of those may individually rise to the level of being able to do something about it, but a pattern of 47 times, well, that may be something you can do something about. So investigate every accident, have an incident report every time something happens, keep it written down, keep them safe. Number 7, control all your entrances to the church. Lock and monitor the main entrance, assign deacons or ushers to ensure controlled access, and keep side entrances and other things monitored as well. Number 8, check all your fire extinguishers, your doors, your locks, your exit signs, and ensure that every zone is well equipped, working properly, and in good repair, and then just make sure to check that once a month. Number 9, schedule an active shooter training. In today's climate, this is something every church should have. I think I said it yesterday also, but one of the most common threads between those who commit mass shootings and active shooter issues is a history of domestic violence. If you have anyone in your church who is going through a domestic violence situation, your risk of an active shooter situation is higher than it would be otherwise. It's just statistics. Require attendance at an active shooter training by all departmental leaders and volunteers so that they all know what to do. Ask local law enforcement to train all your deacons and greeters in threat recognition. Make sure your team knows that if they see something, they are expected to say something. You do not want people to keep stuff quiet or to keep concerns or suspicions or observations quiet just to not rock the boat. Prioritize thorough background checks for all volunteers, not just those who work with children, and develop a strict training and safety protocol for all children's volunteers. Make it mandatory. You haven't been there, you haven't completed it, you cannot show up and volunteer. You can't be a parent on the bus, you can't do anything else. You have to complete those things. Number 12, communicate the expectation that any suspicion of inappropriate behavior toward a minor by any member, visitor, volunteer must be immediately reported to law enforcement and then fully cooperate with any investigations. Don't play around with it. Educate church staff and volunteers on the prevalence and signs of domestic violence in the faith community. Choose a domestic violence contact person who is discreet and well-trained to liaise between the church and the community and implement awareness of domestic violence support, resources, and protocols to all the church members. Make it a thing everybody knows about. Now, going back to number 12, that whole communicate about behavior of any suspicious behavior to minors, something we're going to talk about again. It's in another presentation, but it just applies right here. Do you know why this is so important? Because the average sex offender has between 50 and 150 victims, separate individuals, before their first arrest. If someone is hurting your kids, it is very likely not an isolated situation, and there are any number of others that are in the process or have already been harmed, and you have to take it seriously. Jeremiah 13:20 says, "Where is the flock that was given to you? Your beautiful sheep." We are responsible for the children in our community, and their safety needs to be our top priority.